The first meeting took place at midnight, in the kind of law office that never truly slept. Floor-to-ceiling windows glared with the reflection of downtown lights, and silence hung heavy, broken only by the hum of the city outside. Jonathan Pierce looked like a man who had spent too long hiding behind glass, an executive whose confidence was built on secrets. The divorce papers on the table were immaculate, printed on expensive stock, like a eulogy written in serif font. Across from him sat Michael Carver, his new attorney. Young, methodical, too self-assured for someone barely a decade out of law school. His voice carried that unsettling calm lawyers develop after years of listening to other people ruin themselves. "I've read everything," Michael said, sliding a folder back toward him. "Your wife's petition is brutal, but manageable, if you're honest with me." Jonathan hesitated. "Honesty's overrated in this business." "In mine," Michael replied. "It's currency." Jonathan studied him. There was something precise about the man. His posture, his diction, his watch aligned perfectly with the edge of the folder. Trust, Jonathan thought, was a dangerous luxury. But at that moment he needed to buy it. "There's one thing not in the papers," he said finally. "A woman." Michael's pen stopped mid-note. "My mistress," Jonathan continued. "Ex-mistress, technically. She's problematic." "Define problematic." "She's threatening to go public. She's got messages, photos, details that would turn this divorce into a career execution. My wife's attorney doesn't know yet, but she will." Michael leaned back. "And you want me to silence her?" "I want you to make her disappear legally," Jonathan said. "Non-disclosure, settlement, whatever it takes. Just keep her out of the case." Michael's lips curved slightly. "That depends on how much you're willing to pay for silence." Jonathan exhaled, sliding a check across the table. "Whatever it costs." Over the following weeks, the arrangement deepened. Michael handled everything: drafted agreements, arranged private meetings, controlled communication between Jonathan and the ex-mistress, Sienna Vale, a nightclub singer turned liability. At first, the updates were reassuring. "She's compliant," Michael would say. "She understands the gravity." But gradually, things began to shift. Calls went unanswered, texts delayed. When Jonathan finally reached Sienna, her tone had changed, calm, confident, almost mocking. "I don't think Michael told you," she said softly, "but we've been seeing each other. Professionally, of course." Jonathan froze. "Seeing each other?" A laugh. "He's very persuasive. You'd be surprised what he knows about you." The line went dead. The next morning Michael arrived at Jonathan's office as if nothing had happened. "I need your signature on the revised confidentiality agreement," he said, laying out papers with surgical precision. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "You're sure she's signing?" "She will," Michael said. "She's cooperative." There was something in the pause between those words that made Jonathan's stomach turn. He signed anyway. That night, Jonathan searched for her. He called, texted, emailed. No response. When he finally drove past her apartment, he saw the lights on, a silhouette moving across the curtain, broad shoulders, familiar stance. Michael's. The realization came like impact, violent and wordless. He sat there in the car, rain tapping against the windshield, feeling the first fracture of something far worse than betrayal. His lawyer wasn't just sleeping with his ex-mistress, he was building a case against him, one night at a time. Jonathan Pierce had lived his life mastering risk. He'd turned companies around on instinct, bluffed billion-dollar mergers into existence, and crushed competitors with a smile. But this was different. There were no balance sheets for betrayal. 3 days passed before Michael returned his calls. When he finally did, his voice was smooth as a courtroom lie. "Relax, Jonathan. Sienna's handled. She signed the agreement yesterday. I want proof. You'll get it. Trust me." 2 words Jonathan no longer believed. He spent the next morning in his office watching the markets collapse in miniature across his monitors, but all he saw was her name, in the headlines, that hadn't been written yet. Sienna Vale. The affair that ended the empire. He opened a search tab, typed her name and froze when an image appeared. Sienna on a red carpet at a charity gala, hand on Michael Carver's arm. It was everywhere. Local gossip sites. A blurred photo on an influencer's feed, captioned "Attorney Carver and singer Sienna Vale." The the city's new power couple. The stomach punch was immediate. He closed the browser, rage blooming under his ribs. By noon he was in Michael's office, ignoring the assistant's protests. "What the hell is this?" he barked, throwing a printout onto the desk. Michael glanced at it, unimpressed. "Public relations. Not everything's a conspiracy. You're sleeping with her." A pause. Then softly, "That's not relevant to your case. It's a conflict of interest." Michael leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Only if I represent her, which I don't. You're exploiting privileged information." He smiled thinly. "Then sue me. But think very carefully about what discovery might uncover. You've given me access to everything, Jonathan. Every offshore account, every email, every lie you told your board. You really want that dragged into daylight?" The silence that followed felt surgical. Michael's words were a scalpel cutting away the illusion of control. "Get out," Jonathan whispered. "Gladly," Michael said, collecting his coat. "We're done," but she isn't. That night Sienna called. The tone was different now. Steady, almost sympathetic. "You shouldn't have tried to scare him," she said. "You're both extorting me." "No, darling," she sighed. "He's protecting me, from you." Jonathan's hand tightened around the phone. "He's using you. Maybe, but he listens, which is more than you ever did." The line went silent. Somewhere in that silence, Jonathan felt the edges of his life start to unravel. Within a week, rumors leaked to the press, allegations of corporate misconduct, misuse of marital assets, whispers of harassment. None traceable, all poisonous. His board demanded explanations. His wife's attorney filed motions citing new evidence. Every road led back to Carver. Jonathan hired a private investigator, a retired cop who still smelled faintly of nicotine and distrust. 2 days later the man returned with a USB drive. "Pulled this off a phone. I cloned at a hotel bar," he said. "You're not gonna like it." The video was grainy, filmed through a cracked door. Michael and Sienna in a hotel suite, papers spread across the bed. Sienna's voice soft, coaxing. "So he doesn't know you're recording?" Michael's reply was ice. "Not yet. But once he accuses me publicly, I'll have what I need." Jonathan stopped the playback halfway through, the room spinning. He'd hired a man to save him, and instead built his own executioner. The next morning, subpoenas arrived. The SEC wanted records. His board called an emergency session, and amid the chaos, a courier delivered a single letter, handwritten, folded in perfect thirds. "You taught me everything I needed to know about power. I'm just applying it better. MC." Jonathan read it twice, then burned it over his sink. But the words remained, etched somewhere behind his eyes. He wasn't fighting a divorce anymore. He was fighting a ghost in a tailored suit who understood every weapon he'd ever used. And the law, his last defense, now belonged to the enemy. By the second month of the war, Jonathan Pierce no longer recognized himself in mirrors. His reflection looked older, as if betrayal had aged him faster than truth ever could. The newspapers had turned his name into currency, traded in rumor, polished in scandal. The board suspended him. The divorce dragged on, and his once perfect life began to rot in public view. He sat in his penthouse office one night, the skyline glittering beneath storm clouds, a tumbler of bourbon sweating in his hand. The only sound was the hum of his phone recording every voicemail. Sienna left, half threats, half apologies. Then came one that froze him mid. "Sip. You don't have to fight him, John. He's already won." He replayed it 3 times. The tone was different. Scared. Sienna sounded less like a co-conspirator, more like a hostage. He met her 2 nights later in the back booth of a downtown bar. She wore sunglasses though it was past midnight, her hands trembling as she lit a cigarette. "He's using me," she said quietly. "I thought I could control him, but he records everything. He knows things I never told anyone." "Then testify," Jonathan said. "Tell the court what he's done." He said, "If I talk, he'll release the videos. The ones of us." Jonathan leaned forward. "There are no videos." "There are," she whispered. "He has everything. Hotel footage, messages, even our calls. He said he'd leak them if I ever helped you." Jonathan felt the bourbon burn up his throat. "You let him destroy you?" "No," she said, looking at him through tears. I let him become you. That night Jonathan made his first illegal decision. He called the investigator again. I want leverage, he said, on both of them. The man hesitated. That means crossing lines. I'm already past them. Within a week, Jonathan had copies of Michael Carver's sealed financials, evidence of offshore accounts, unreported retainers, and 2 wire transfers labeled S. Vale Consulting. Proof of collusion, proof of deceit. But there was one transaction that made his blood run cold. A payment from Pierce Holdings LLC, his own company, transferred without authorization 3 months earlier. Michael had been stealing from him long before the affair. Jonathan's new lawyer, a seasoned litigator named Barbara Lane, reviewed the data and spoke without emotion. We can file a motion to disqualify him, maybe open a fraud inquiry. But once this hits court, it's scorched earth. Good, he said. Barbara studied him. You understand that if we expose him, everything about Sienna becomes evidence too. He didn't flinch, then let it burn. The motion went public the next morning. Pierce v. Carver. Allegations of attorney misconduct and conflict of interest. Within hours, media outlets devoured it. Michael responded with a press release calling the claims the desperate ramblings of a disgraced executive. The photo accompanying it showed him and Sienna on the courthouse steps, united, radiant, untouchable. But behind the image, cracks began to form. Barbara's team leaked documents, carefully timed, legally gray, showing that Carver had manipulated settlement funds, rerouted client money, and falsified billing statements. The Bar Association announced a preliminary review. For the first time in weeks, Jonathan slept. Briefly. Then 3 nights later, an envelope appeared under his door. No name, no address, just a flash drive inside. He plugged it in. The screen filled with a single video. Sienna sat alone in a hotel room, pale, trembling. He made me say it, she whispered to the camera. I never meant to accuse him. Jonathan forced me. He threatened to kill me if I didn't. Her eyes darted to someone off screen. And there it was, the reflection of Michael Carver holding the phone. Jonathan slammed the laptop shut. The trap had been set perfectly. Now the evidence that could save him might also convict him. The subpoena arrived before dawn, slid under Jonathan's apartment door like a threat written in legalese. Carver v. Pierce. Defamation, intimidation, and malicious interference. The irony was surgical. His own lawyer suing him with the same precision he'd once admired. By breakfast every news channel had picked it up. Michael Carver was no longer the accused. He was the victim. The narrative flipped overnight. A brilliant attorney smeared by a bitter former client and his unstable ex-lover. Barbara Lane watched the coverage from across Jonathan's kitchen island, expression unreadable. He's fast, she said. He's desperate. No, she replied, closing her laptop. He's winning. In court, Carver arrived looking immaculate. The cameras adored him. That disarming half-smile, the flash of humility rehearsed to perfection. Mr. Pierce has made baseless accusations, he told reporters. This isn't about truth. It's about revenge. Jonathan entered through a side door, flanked by his legal team. Every whisper felt aimed at his back. When the session began, Carver's attorney, a sleek woman named Diane Frost, delivered the opening statement like a sermon. Jonathan Pierce exploited his relationship with a vulnerable young woman. When she sought legal help, he retaliated by fabricating claims against her attorney. Jonathan's jaw clenched. Diane continued, "My client's only crime was compassion for a woman abused by a powerful man." Barbara rose calmly. "Your Honor, we will show that Mr. Carver's compassion included offshore payments, falsified documents, and a sexual relationship with a key witness." The judge sighed. "Proceed carefully, Miss Lane." What followed was less trial than theater. Carver sat perfectly still as recordings played. Snippets of calls, fragments of messages, each selected to frame Jonathan as manipulative and controlling. Every phrase he'd ever used out of anger now echoed like evidence. Then came the video, Sienna's trembling confession. The courtroom dimmed as her voice filled the speakers. "He made me lie. He said if I didn't, he'd ruin me." Jonathan couldn't look away. It didn't matter that the footage was doctored. The illusion was enough. The jurors shifted in their seats, and he knew they'd already chosen sides. When the lights came back on, Barbara stood. We have proof this video was manipulated. Metadata, timestamps, inconsistencies. But before we present it, we'd like to call a witness. A murmur rippled through the room as a woman entered from the back. Sienna. She looked fragile, wearing a plain coat and no makeup. Her eyes met Jonathan's briefly before settling on Michael. For the first time he looked unsettled. Barbara guided her gently. "Miss Vale, have you spoken to Mr. Carver in the past week?" "Yes," she said softly. "He told me what to say if I was called to testify." "What did he tell you?" "To blame Jonathan, to cry, to make it sound real." Gasps filled the courtroom. Carver's face hardened, jaw ticking once before he caught himself. Barbara stepped closer. "Miss Vale, why are you here today?" "Because he recorded everything," she said, voice shaking. "Every conversation, every night." He said it was for insurance. But it wasn't about protection. It was control. The judge leaned forward. "Do you have proof of these recordings?" Sienna nodded, pulling a flash drive from her coat pocket. "He kept backups. I took one before I left. The files detonated the case." Carver's voice, captured in clear audio. "Plotting, coercing, rehearsing testimony. She'll break. They always do. Pierce thinks he can outspend me, but reputation costs nothing once it's dead." The room spun out of control. Diane Frost tried to object, but the damage was irreversible. The judge ordered an immediate recess. Investigators rushed to verify the data. Jonathan sat motionless, heart hammering. Sienna didn't look at him, didn't look at anyone. She just whispered, "He'll come after us both now." That night Jonathan returned home to find his apartment door ajar. Nothing stolen, nothing broken. Just a single envelope on his desk, identical to the one he'd burned weeks earlier. Inside was a Polaroid, a photo of him and Sienna, in that bar, heads close mid-conversation, taken through the window. On the back, written in Michael's perfect handwriting, "Your move." The morning after Sienna's testimony, the city felt different, charged, watchful, as if every reflection hit a camera. The courthouse steps were swarmed by reporters, the air thick with microphones and questions that sounded like accusations. For the first time, Michael Carver avoided the press. His silence said more than any statement could. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted. The judge ordered the recordings authenticated. The Bar Association opened an internal probe, and Diane Frost filed a motion to dismiss on procedural grounds that nobody believed would hold. Barbara leaned over to Jonathan. "He's bleeding. Don't get comfortable." He didn't. He couldn't. That afternoon, the evidence lab confirmed the recordings were genuine. Every timestamp matched Sienna's timeline. Every voice print analysis confirmed Carver's involvement. The prosecutor's office announced a formal criminal inquiry. But Michael was already moving faster than the law. That night, Sienna disappeared. Her apartment was found empty. Her phone left charging beside an unmade bed. The neighbors said she'd left with a man in a dark sedan, someone she seemed to know. The surveillance cameras at the building's entrance had been wiped clean, not cut, but overwritten, the kind of work only someone who understood systems would know how to execute. Barbara called at dawn. "We can't find her. She's the key witness. Without her, the recordings are circumstantial." Jonathan felt the old fear return, cold and precise. He won't hurt her. Barbara's silence was long. "You don't actually believe that?" By mid-morning, the counterattack began. A leaked affidavit appeared online, unsigned but unmistakably written by Sienna, accusing Jonathan of coercion, bribery, and perjury. The signature line was blank, but the story didn't need her handwriting. The public believed what it wanted, that both men were corrupt, that the woman was the only one who ever told the truth. Michael's statement dropped minutes later. "I have no ill will toward Mr. Pierce or Miss Vale. I only regret that my kindness was mistaken for conspiracy." The performance was perfect, contrition mixed with moral exhaustion. Even his enemies admired the craftsmanship. Jonathan stared at the screen, rage rising in his throat. "He's using her disappearance to clean himself." Barbara's reply was soft. "Then we find her first." The private investigator tracked a credit card hit near the Delaware border, a motel paid under an alias matching Sienna's initials. Jonathan went himself. He found the room dark, the air heavy with mildew, and something else, fear. On the nightstand sat a half-finished drink and a sealed envelope. Inside, a flash drive, and a note in Sienna's handwriting. If you're reading this, he found me first, but he won't find what I left behind. The drive contained a single audio file. Sienna, her voice calm and deliberate. He told me everything. Every client he manipulated. Every payoff. Every time he used the law like a weapon. He said he admired you, Jonathan. That he wanted to be you, until he realized he could own you instead. Then silence, and a final whisper. I'm sorry. Jonathan sat in the dark, listening to her voice until dawn. It wasn't proof that she was alive, but it was proof that she'd tried to make it right. 2 days later, the story exploded. A news outlet published excerpts from Sienna's recording, alongside leaked portions of Carver's confidential case files, asset lists, unsealed settlements, secret correspondences. No one knew who leaked them, but everyone had theories. Carver's firm collapsed overnight. His partners issued statements distancing themselves. His clients withdrew. His accounts froze. He became radioactive, professionally dead, publicly exposed. But the damage spread both ways. The leaks contained fragments of Jonathan's own past, offshore accounts, misused corporate funds, the kind of details that turned sympathy into suspicion. Barbara looked at him across her desk. He's burning down the entire house just to drag you into the ashes. Jonathan exhaled, the exhaustion bone deep. Then we make sure he's inside when it falls. That night a message appeared in his inbox. No sender, no traceable IP. Just a single line. You wanted truth. Now watch what it costs. Attached was a video feed, a live stream. The camera shook slightly before focusing on a woman sitting in a chair, blindfolded, hands bound. A voice off-screen whispered, "Justice always needs a witness." The feed went black. Jonathan stared at the screen, realizing the war had crossed its final line. The courtroom was over. This was personal now. They called it an abduction because the drama required a villain and a body. Jonathan refused the word. There was no broken door, no forced entry, no ransom note with slashed paper and dramatic fonts. What happened to Sienna was quieter, bureaucratic, and therefore far more insidious. She vanished from the public record. Weeks of searching produced only blanks. Hotels claimed no check-ins under her name. Surveillance footage showed only gaps where timestamps had been altered, overwritten, not with violence, but with code. The investigator called it professional misdirection. Jonathan called it calculated control. Michael Carver called it coincidence. But Sienna had left markers, small defiant breadcrumbs, designed not to be found by the press but to be useful in a courtroom. The motel flash drive had been the first. The second was a slim manila envelope mailed from a P.O. box under a false name, containing nothing but a list of case numbers and one sentence in Sienna's handwriting. If I go silent, listen to the files. Those files, when they surfaced, arrived anonymized to Barbara Lane's inbox at 3 in the morning. They were not the lurid footage Carver had threatened with. No hotel tapes, no intimate leaks, no blackmail clips designed to ruin reputations with the crush of public shame. Instead, there were administrative billing ledgers, retainer agreements, annotated emails that matched the signatures Jonathan had found in Hale and Associates archives months earlier. Each item was a thread. Together they hinted at a seam that, if pulled, might unfold a whole network of favor and forgery. Barbara played the files like a harp. She showed the court the transfers labeled S. Vale Consulting, alongside the same ledger entries that had routed money through shell companies tied to a consulting firm under Carver's partner's name. She demonstrated a pattern: money moved, documents amended, witnesses coached. The judge blinked. The reporters' notebooks ticked. And the public's appetite for a tidy villain softened into something more complex. Carver countered with theater. He called a parade of witnesses, PR consultants, former clients, even a forensic analyst who testified about the ease of fabricating documents in the cloud era. He filed motions to exclude the anonymous leaks on grounds of hearsay, and argued that the chain of custody was fatally compromised by the way the evidence was delivered from unknown hands, at odd hours, in formats that required expert translation. Jonathan watched from the gallery as his enemies played the rules like instruments they had learned to tune. He understood then that the courtroom was only one theater. The other stage was the backstage where Carver moved the props. Alliances of convenience. A quiet settlement here, a preventative affidavit there. Sienna's disappearance was a smokescreen. The man behind it was an artisan of plausible deniability. But the files did more than survive a legal scrimmage. They created leverage. A defense motion to compel discovery forced Carver to hand over billing records under oath. An administrative subpoena unearthed an internal memo that mentioned client relations payments and retainer reclassification. The memo did not say why the payments existed. That came later, pieced together by cross-examination and forensic accounting. Each revelation narrowed Carver's options, but it also widened the theater of collateral damage. Clients, junior associates and judges whose names had floated in the margins of transactions now felt the heat of scrutiny. Outside of court, the war became intellectual and legal, a duel of documents and deadlines. Jonathan authorized a controlled leak, selected documents released to a journalist he trusted, not for tabloids but for a paper that still believed in the ritual of careful reporting. The article did not print rumors of sex scandal. It printed invoices, redacted copies of retainer agreements, and 2 paragraphs of context explaining what anonymous files suggested. The public's appetite shifted from prurient spectacle to procedural outrage. When people realized law could be weaponized, outrage took on a sharper edge. Carver responded not by denying everything. Those denials had long lost scent, but by escalating the legal chessboard. He filed emergency motions alleging witness tampering and unlawful surveillance, asking the judge to sanction Jonathan and freeze documents. He hired a team of privacy lawyers to argue that the unauthorized release of private financial data itself constituted an unlawful act, regardless of the provenance of the files. Barbara met each escalation with strategy. She filed for protective orders to shield witnesses, used sealed filings to protect Sienna's identity, and quietly coordinated with prosecutors who were watching the case for signs of a broader pattern. The legal maneuvers became a kind of slow-motion rescue mission. Retrieve what Sienna had left, authenticate it, then use it to force Carver into the light while keeping Sienna's life out of the public eye. At night, Jonathan replayed the exchanges in his head. He thought of all the ways someone could disappear without blood or force, by changing numbers, by rewriting ledgers, by making a life inconvenient enough to be left behind. He thought of Sienna's voice on the flash drive, steady, not pleading. "I'm sorry," she had whispered. "I'm doing what I can." That sentence, small as it was, became a map. Her apology disguised agency. Her silence was a message of protection. Weeks passed. Each court filing peeled back one more layer. Shell companies traced to Carver, service agreements backdated, a junior partner's name repeated like a nervous tick in emails. The judge allowed a limited in-camera review of the most sensitive materials, documents shown to the court but not the public. Those sessions were a kind of blacklight to the conspiracy. Faint watermarks revealed, metadata surfaced, servers pinged and traced. Finally, under the pressure of authenticated documents and a prosecutorial inquiry, Carver agreed to a judicially supervised deposition. He answered questions in a conference room, with a camera in the corner, and an oath on the table. He smiled. He explained. He invoked legalese and the moral posture of a man who had done favors for vulnerable clients. He stated, carefully, that any financial irregularities were clerical errors. He said he had acted in good faith, but the deposition was not meant for the public. It was meant for discovery, for cross-checking, for the slow arithmetic of accountability. It yielded 2 things: a time-stamped admission that Carver had met Sienna in private contexts while representing Jonathan, and an unguarded comment. "I protect the interests of truth, even when the truth is inconvenient." That would be replayed in a different courtroom with different lights. When Sienna reappeared, alive, photographed in the doorway of a rehab center, she did not return triumphant. She returned guarded, exhausted, and resolute. She gave testimony under protective orders, not in public, but to investigators and the grand jury. Her words were laconic, pitiless. She had been coerced into staying silent by the gravity of what Carver knew, and the plausibility of his threats. She had agreed to disappear because she feared exposure that would harm people she cared about, and because she feared the weaponized law more than the uncertain safety of being unknown. The public never saw the whole truth. They saw the contours of it, the outlines left by subpoenas and court orders. For Jonathan, the reprieve was partial. Carver's veneer had cracked, but his capacity for calculated damage remained. The battlefield had shifted from hotel rooms and gossip sites to servers, sealed filings, and the slow, meticulous grind of discovery. In that mechanized quiet, Jonathan learned the hardest lesson of all: to win. You have to be willing to play the game on its own terms, by rules, pages, signatures, and to understand that the law, once weaponized, can defend you as efficiently as it can bury you. He also learned that leverage is a fragile currency. It buys relief, never absolution. When he left the courthouse that night, the lights of the city felt less like interrogation and more like a roadmap. He had not rescued Sienna with force or fury. He had pulled evidence into the daylight and let procedure do what vengeance could not. The absence of spectacle had its own cruelty, but it also left space to plan what came next. And Michael Carver, who had expected absences to be useful, now sat across a table designed by subpoena, where every ledger column and email header could be cross-examined into confession. The war was not over. It had become horribly and finally legal. The conference room on the 23rd floor of the courthouse was air-conditioned into discomfort. Its walls were beige, its table sterile, its clock loud. This was where reputations came to die quietly. Jonathan sat opposite Michael Carver, the camera light blinking red in the corner. No audience, no reporters, just transcripts and truth. Carver's suit was immaculate, as always, but his confidence had acquired tremors. The deposition officer swore him in, voice monotone. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do," Carver said, smiling faintly at the recorder. Barbara Lane began gently, building the rhythm of control. "Mr. Carver, did you receive payments from entities connected to Mr. Pierce while representing him? Payments for services rendered, all lawful. Were those services disclosed to your client?" "They were not required to be." The stenographer's keys clicked like rainfall. Then Barbara shifted gears. "Mr. Carver, can you explain this email, dated June 8th, subject line retainer adjustment, Seville?" Carver studied it. A clerical notation. It lists your account as the recipient of a transfer marked consulting, confidential, correct? "I don't recall the specific language. Would seeing the original refresh your memory?" She projected the email onto the wall, the transfer, the signature block, the attached retainer bearing both his and Sienna's initials. Carver's expression didn't break, but his breathing changed. Small, controlled. "Someone could have altered this," he said. "Forensic analysts confirmed its authenticity yesterday." Barbara leaned forward. "You told the press you never represented Miss Vale. Are you revising that statement?" He looked toward the camera, not at her. "Everything I did was in the best interest of my client." "Which one?" A pause, 2 seconds of silence that would become the centerpiece of the transcript. Outside the deposition room, investigators waited. They'd already seized devices, mirrored hard drives, cross-reference metadata. The pattern was unmistakable now. Duplicate billing entries, misused escrow accounts, and a string of backdated contracts that traced to Carver's private consultancy. Each revelation was a small collapse in the architecture of his power. Jonathan listened without satisfaction. The damage was irreversible, for all of them. The court of public opinion had already blurred distinctions between predator and prey. The only clean thing left was the paper trail. Barbara closed her folder. No further questions. Carver rose, tugging his cuffs, still pretending dignity. "You've built a narrative, Miss Lane, but you've ignored motive." "Your motive?" He smiled. "No, his." He nodded toward Jonathan. "A man who hides assets offshore, manipulates markets, cheats on his wife, and thinks money can erase morality. How hard is it to believe he'd invent a villain to cleanse himself?" Jonathan met his gaze. "You don't get to psychoanalyze me anymore." "Oh, Jonathan," Carver said softly, "I wrote your confession for you." That night, the deposition transcript leaked, anonymously, inevitably. Online, clips of Carver's evasions trended within hours. Commentators dissected his pauses, his deflections, the smirk that betrayed him. For once the public sided with procedural detail instead of spectacle. But victory was brittle. Barbara warned him. "He'll counterfile. He'll turn the leak into an ethics complaint. He'll make you the aggressor again," and he did. Within 24 hours, Carver's lawyers filed a motion alleging breach of confidentiality, claiming Jonathan orchestrated the leak to prejudice potential jurors. The judge scheduled a hearing. The system demanded its ritual of symmetry, every accusation mirrored by one of equal weight. Jonathan felt the familiar chill, the law's version of gravity, always pulling both sides downward. In the days that followed, new witnesses surfaced, junior associates from Carver's firm, paralegals, who'd resigned quietly. They described encrypted drives labeled insurance, duplicate case files stored off-site, and instructions to retain leverage material. The revelations were bureaucratic, not cinematic, but devastating. Carver's world had been built on documentation. Now documentation was undoing him. Then, unexpectedly, a letter arrived at Jonathan's office. Handwritten, neat. From Sienna. "I'm not running anymore. Tell them I'll testify again if they need me." He read it twice before folding it carefully into his pocket. When the next hearing opened, Sienna appeared in person. No cameras this time, no spectacle, just testimony under oath. She spoke evenly, how Carver had promised to protect her, how he'd drafted statements for her to sign, how he'd used Jonathan's secrets as currency. Her voice carried a tired steadiness that no cross-examination could shake. Carver listened without interrupting, his expression carved from disbelief. When it was over, he stood and requested permission to address the court himself. "Your Honor, every word she said has context. Every accusation has a price. If justice means ruin, then we're all guilty." The judge's gavel cut the room in half. "Enough, Mr. Carver." Outside, snow fell over the courthouse steps. Barbara exhaled, her breath turning white. "He's cornered." Jonathan shook his head. "He's cornered men before. That's when he's most dangerous." She gave a small, grim smile. "Then let him try one last move. I want to see what truth looks like when it runs out of oxygen." The news broke before dawn. Federal investigation widens into attorney misconduct and fraud ring connected to Michael Carver. By the time Jonathan reached his office, his phone was already a graveyard of missed calls. Reporters, board members, prosecutors. Everyone wanted a quote. No one wanted the truth. Barbara arrived 10 minutes later, coat unbuttoned, eyes bright with exhaustion and victory. "They found the servers," she said. "Off-site, encrypted, mislabeled as client archives. It's all there, his shadow practice, the money flow, the fabricated testimonies." Jonathan stared out the window, and Sienna, safe, under protection. For real this time. He nodded, but the relief didn't land. He had spent months preparing for war. Peace felt suspicious. In court, Carver appeared without his usual armor. His suit was rumpled, his expression hollow. The confidence that once filled the room now clung to him like a rumor. He didn't look at Jonathan, didn't speak to the cameras. The judge called the case, State of New York v. Michael Carver. The charges rolled off like a litany: fraud, obstruction, breach of fiduciary duty, conspiracy to manipulate evidence. As the prosecutor outlined the timeline, Carver's jaw tightened, not in denial but in calculation. He wasn't shocked, he was counting moves that no longer existed. When Sienna took the stand again, she didn't cry. She spoke with the precision of someone who had stopped needing forgiveness. He said law was theater. He said if you control the script, no one cares if it's true. The words landed like stones. Outside, the public devoured every update. The same networks that once called Jonathan a liar now painted him as reluctant hero. Commentators debated the Carver method, how one man had bent ethics until they became a weapon. Late-night hosts turned it into metaphor. Hashtags bloomed and withered by noon. Barbara warned him not to read the coverage. "Public absolution is temporary," she said. "Don't mistake noise for justice." But Jonathan read anyway. He needed to see the shift, to believe that the story could bend back toward truth. Carver's defense strategy collapsed on live television. Emails surfaced showing payments to multiple attorneys across states, evidence that his consultancy was an elaborate laundering network. Former clients testified about manipulated settlements. Associates turned state's evidence, each one trading loyalty for leniency. Through it all, Carver sat silent, his eyes dull, his fingers tapping a steady rhythm on the defense table. When the verdict came, guilty on all primary counts, he didn't flinch. He just looked at Jonathan once, long enough to say what words couldn't. "You won nothing, I didn't let you win." After the verdict, the system moved with bureaucratic precision. Bar suspension, asset seizures, sentencing schedules, the machinery of accountability grinding forward, slow but inexorable. Barbara and Jonathan walked out into the bright, indifferent light of the courthouse steps. Reporters shouted his name. Flashbulbs cracked. He kept walking. "He'll appeal," Barbara said. He always does. They reached the car in silence. She turned to him. It's over. He shook his head. It's documented. That's not the same. That evening Jonathan found an envelope slipped under his apartment door. No return address. Inside, a single page, a copy of his own company's ledger highlighted with transfers that matched the very funds Carver had stolen months ago. Written in blue ink at the bottom. You taught me everything about leverage. You just never learned when to stop using it. No signature. But he didn't need one. It was Carver's handwriting. Slanted. Careful. Deliberate. Either sent before conviction or arranged long in advance. The man's reach, even in defeat, was still precise. Jonathan folded the letter carefully, set it in his fireplace, and watched it burn. He told himself it was over, but as the paper curled he felt the truth. Closure was another kind of performance. The script never ended. It only changed narrators. A month later the district attorney called. We traced one of the offshore accounts back to your company's pre-divorce filings. We'll need your cooperation to close it. Jonathan looked at the city skyline, its windows flickering like courtroom lights. Of course, he said. Whatever's necessary. When he hung up he poured a drink and smiled faintly. Carver might have been gone, but his lesson remained. Power isn't taken. It's inherited by whoever's willing to keep their hands dirty after everyone else washes theirs. The trial was over, but the silence it left behind had teeth. Jonathan Pierce discovered that victory in court didn't erase suspicion. It only changed its direction. Partners he had known for 20 years suddenly avoided meetings. Clients who'd once begged for his advice now preferred emails to handshakes. The law had cleared him, but the world had simply learned to doubt better. He spent his mornings at the firm's corner office, now stripped of any personal detail. No photos, no awards, just folders. Bureaucracy had become his therapy. The paperwork reminded him that systems could still function even when people broke. Barbara stopped by once a week, her briefcases heavier, her patience shorter. Your name's clean on record, she said one afternoon. But off the record people remember headlines, not verdicts. Jonathan managed a dry laugh. That's the justice we sell, temporary credibility. She sighed. The DA's office wants a deposition background on the offshore accounts. They're closing the loop. He nodded. I'll cooperate. Good, she said. Because if you don't, they'll wonder why. The deposition took place in a plain federal office. No wood paneling. No drama. Just fluorescent light and tired bureaucrats asking measured questions. Mr. Pierce, one of them said, can you confirm that account 4791 was created under your authority? I can confirm it existed, Jonathan replied evenly. And that the funds were later transferred without your consent? Yes. To whom? He hesitated. To Michael Carver. The room remained still, pens scratching quietly. Then you were both part of the same network. He met the examiner's eyes. No. He built the network around me. A pause, then softly. Do you believe you're free of it now? Jonathan smiled. Freedom's relative. The law doesn't give it. It leases it. Outside the city pulsed with normalcy that felt fraudulent. Jonathan walked past the courthouse where his name had once echoed and realized that justice didn't end. It faded. The marble steps were cleaner. The cameras gone, but the ghosts remained. Sienna's voice in his memory. Carver's laughter buried in every clause he read. He stopped by the river where he'd first confronted Carver months earlier. The skyline glowed like a lineup of witnesses refusing to speak. A young lawyer stood nearby, on the phone, reciting language that sounded like strategy disguised as mercy. Jonathan almost smiled. He knew the tone too well. That was how it always started, with conviction dressed as competence. Back at his apartment, an envelope waited on the counter. This time it bore an official seal. Department of Justice. Ethics Division. Inside was a subpoena, res potential complicity in offshore asset mismanagement. Barbara called within minutes. They're extending the investigation. You're not a target, but they're reviewing everyone connected to Carver's accounts. Jonathan exhaled slowly. He's still pulling strings, even from a cell. Or you're still standing in his web, she said. There's a difference. The following week, Sienna testified again, this time behind closed doors. She spoke about coercion, falsified agreements, and the way Carver had weaponized intimacy. Her statement exonerated Jonathan publicly, but privately it reopened wounds that neither of them knew how to close. She sent him a short message afterward. "They'll never believe how much of him survived inside us." He didn't reply. Some truths couldn't be untangled without becoming lies. Then came the final visit. The warden of Otisville called. Carver requested a meeting before his sentencing transfer. "He named you specifically." Barbara advised against it. "He'll manipulate you again." Jonathan stared out the window. "He's already in my head. I might as well look him in the eye." The prison meeting room smelled of disinfectant and finality. Carver sat behind the glass, wearing the same calm as always, his hands folded like a prayer. "You look tired," he said. "You look finished." Carver smiled. "Finished is a matter of timing. You took everything I built, Jonathan, but do you really know what to do with it?" Jonathan didn't answer. Carver leaned closer. "They'll come for you next. They have to. The system needs symmetry. Hero and villain, one can't exist without the other." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "You're still playing." "I'm teaching," Carver murmured. "Every case needs a precedent." The guard signaled the end of time. Jonathan stood to leave. Carver called after him. "When they ask what you learned from me, tell them this power doesn't corrupt. It remembers." Outside, snow began to fall again, as if erasing the footprints of the past few months. Jonathan walked slowly, coat collar turned up, the chill biting into him like a verdict he'd expected all along. He knew Carver was right about one thing. Memory was its own kind of corruption. It never ended cleanly. It lingered, shaped choices, rewrote motives. And somewhere in that residue, Jonathan found something he'd almost forgotten: purpose. Not to prove innocence, not to punish guilt, but to understand the machinery that had consumed them both. Spring arrived late, hesitating over the city like a hung jury. The courthouse plaza, once filled with cameras and protest signs, now looked like an afterimage, as if the scandal had happened somewhere else to someone else. Jonathan Pierce walked across it every morning, on his way to a new office in a smaller building, a quieter firm. No partners, no clients from his old empire, just a handful of young lawyers who still believed the law could be repaired if you handled it carefully enough. He kept no plaques on the walls, only case files and a single framed quote above his desk. "Truth is not a verdict." It had belonged to Barbara, a parting gift before she took a teaching post upstate. "Start over," she'd told him, "but don't rewrite." He was trying. The last thread of the Carver case reached him in a gray envelope marked Department of Justice, Final Disposition. Inside were 3 lines. Carver, Mikil. Appeal denied. Disposition transferred to federal facility. Status non-compliant during transport. No details, no cause. Just administrative language sealing a life. He read the page twice, then folded it carefully into his briefcase without comment. Closure, by paperwork. Carver would have appreciated the irony. Sienna sent him one more letter a week later from an address in California. She wrote about rebuilding quietly, about singing again, about testifying for other victims in bar ethics hearings. "You told me once that law is the art of survival. I think you were wrong. It's the art of learning what to survive for." He didn't answer. He kept the letter in the same drawer as the DOJ notice. 2 opposing statements that balanced each other like evidence exhibits. When he was called to testify before the Ethics Commission that spring, the hearing was procedural, almost polite. They wanted to know what he had learned from the Carver matter. He told them the truth, or the closest version he could manage. "I learned that the law doesn't hate corruption," he said evenly. "It studies it. It learns from it. Then it uses that knowledge to protect itself." A murmur moved through the panel. "Do you regret your choices, Mr. Pierce?" He thought about it. "Regret implies I had better options." The chair nodded once, expression unreadable. "You may step down." When he left the chamber, the reporters didn't bother with him anymore. The world had moved on to new scandals, fresher villains. In a strange way, that anonymity felt like absolution. Months passed. He spent his days teaching litigation tactics to junior associates and his nights drafting amicus briefs for reform groups. Tiny gestures toward redemption that no one would read, but that felt necessary. Occasionally someone would recognize his name and whisper about the case that had once gripped the country. He would smile politely and say, "That was another lifetime." One evening, a courier delivered a small box to his office. No sender. Inside was a single USB drive, unmarked except for a tag. "For when you forget why you fought." He hesitated, then plugged it into his laptop. The screen filled with folders, archived evidence from the Carver investigation, each document cross-referenced and annotated. And at the top, one final file named verdict.mp4. The video opened on static, then cleared into footage of a courtroom. His courtroom, years earlier. The camera panned slowly to the defense table. Carver sat there, smirking at something just out of frame. The audio captured his voice, low and certain. "Justice isn't truth, it's endurance. Let's see who lasts longer." The video ended abruptly, looping back to the same frozen frame of Carver's half-smile. Jonathan stared at it for a long time, then closed the lid of the laptop. The words weren't a threat anymore, they were an epitaph. That night, he walked home along the river. The courthouse lights shimmered in the water, bending and breaking like reflections of a truth too flexible to ever stay whole. He thought about Carver, about Sienna, about Barbara's warning that stories never end. They just go quiet. At the bridge, he stopped and watched the current carry away a sheet of paper torn loose from someone's briefcase, the text dissolving as it drifted downstream. The city hummed around him, indifferent and alive. For the first time in years, Jonathan felt the weight lift, not because he was innocent, but because he finally understood survival wasn't winning. It was continuing. He turned from the river, straightened his coat, and walked toward the lights, a man neither guilty nor redeemed, only still standing. The last witness in a case that would never truly close.